Good afternoon. This is your new Pan-African show called Afreeqa. We have a great guest for you today. Please make sure you tune in at 4 p.m. on Saturdays. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Could you please introduce yourself?
My name is Solomon, and I'm an assistant professor at Addis Ababa University, the Department of Science and Mathematics Education.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Why did you choose education?
Education is everything. I mean, how can you skip
Not.
education? Yeah, there is always this argument, In everything I talk, I do, I say, I bring up education because it is the most fundamental aspect of a human being, You can train animals, definitely, but you can't educate animals. Human beings have a special category, or I always say to my students, regard human beings as mines, rich in gems of inestimable value. And it's only education that can reveal this treasure and enable humankind to benefit therefrom. See, so human beings is like a mine. It's only education as a tool. That's why I chose education. Okay, that's why I chose education.
Okay. What is a holistic education system? Why do you think it would work in Ethiopia?
It's a good question, actually, because it's been never asked in Ethiopia. So when we say education, it's related with the nature of human beings. See, so fundamentally, when you build a curriculum, you start with the question of philosophy. The fundamental questions that you need to answer in education is what is a human being? So when we really closely look at the nature of human beings, there are like three nature that you can tap into. It's physical, we have this physical nature, and we have an intellectual nature, we have also a spiritual nature. So the intellectual is like borders between the physical and the spiritual. So for all these three, you need to have a plan for educating these three. So the body is like you have a physical and health education. The body has to be trained, well muscled, healthy, should nurture it well, should train it well so that it becomes resilient. For intellectual, you need to train with science, maths. And also there's a spiritual aspect, which is really quite inherent in us. That's the nature that separates us from animals in terms of intellect to some extent, and of course body. It's a nature that we share with other animals. But that spiritual creation is that puts us apart from other nature. So unless you address in your education, unless you address these three nature, we cannot call it holistic. That's why I advocate for holistic education. Any child in the school has to get the type of education that addresses these three elements.
What are the fundamental curriculum development obstacles in Ethiopia? Do these obstacles differ age to age, or are they the same across the ages?
Yeah, you know what? If you read some of the research in the 1930s, almost is the same research that has been, or the same recommendation given now, in the educational research. In the 1930s, there was an American scholar, who was asked to sort of find out the problems in the Ethiopian education system. And he found out, you have a rich culture and you don't teach it, The content of education should be culture, your own culture. Right. But in Ethiopia, we didn't bring our, we were offering education through English, both the content, in a way the content of the method was English. So we were taught somehow foreign curriculum, taught by actually foreigners, So he was surprised to say, Ethiopia has a rich history, rich philosophy, rich culture, and bringing this into education. Now, after let's say maybe 100 years, recently the Cambridge International, a British company, again did research and, showed that education lacks relevance in the Ethiopian context, It doesn't address the needs of Ethiopians, which means, still we're not bringing our culture to our schools. So the questions were the same, the recommendations are the same, but in terms of acting, we're very slow. I don't know why, because educational system is a very complicated or complex system. So at some point, one of the government or a new government may address a particular aspect of education, but unless, again, you address it holistically, and overhaul, still it doesn't take root. So you have the curriculum aspect. Even if you write a very curriculum, when I say in this context curriculum, the materials, teaching, learning materials, could be very nice, but who delivers this? You need to have a very well-trained teachers, First, well recruited, well-trained, well-placed, and well-monitored teachers. And of course also well-protected, well-kept teachers. You need those kind of teachers to deliver the curriculum. In all this also, you need to build institutional capacity. Ministry of Education, what kind of principals do you have? What kind of schools do you have? Do the teachers have enough, for example, offices, or materials in the school? So you can see it from these three aspects. So at some point, you work on one, but not all the elements, and then because of that, the reform in education in Ethiopia has been very, very slow, Otherwise, there were really good policies, good research.
So you mentioned that there were two entities in different times of the years that came to do a study on our education system. They were both non-Ethiopian. Have any Ethiopian actually done that job?
No. Well, like I'm saying, like I was mentioning in the 1930s and just currently like last year, before last year. It was foreigners. In between, of course, there were Ethiopians, In fact, very recently also, in order to develop the roadmap of education in Ethiopia, it was Ethiopian professors who did the research. But in terms of the finding out the gaps in the curriculum, it was given to a foreign company. And of course, then, again, it was given to them to really fill the gap. It's really weird. When you have really, professors, well-educated curriculum experts, educators in ArtsTvWorld University and elsewhere, others, maybe some of the people actually are less experts than some of us in the university. But I don't know how it was awarded to foreigners to build our education. Honestly, maybe before 50 or 60 years, you may say we may not have the capacity.
Exactly.
But now we have built enough capacity to reform our education. And I don't know how sincerely these people do it. Because maybe, I don't know, maybe it is in your question later. So education in Ethiopia has been used as a colonizing instrument.
Yes, so, my fifth question is that question, so don't bring it up.
All right.
What is the relationship between Pan-Africanism and education?
The point is that, when you educate a person properly, let's say there is always a quote that I usually mention for my students, that I say human being or a man is a supreme talisman. Lack of proper education has only deprived him what he inherently possesses. Okay? So every individual inherent is like a talisman. Exactly. So there's a lot of gem in it. So if you properly educate him, that he can be, he lightens, He lightens his community, his country, his continent. But at the same time, it's a child, it's like potentially so darkness. If you educate him properly, he become, it's a shining gem. If you don't educate him properly, then it means you can easily manipulate him. You can easily oppress him. And that is the grievous oppression, by the way, is when people look for knowledge and they don't know where to locate it. Yeah. That's the grievous oppression. And now you are in dark and you don't know what is right and wrong, then it is easy to manipulate you. Now, Pan-Africanism is related with liberation, It's an anti-colonial movement. So if we educate properly, it means now each African country understands itself, knows itself, knows the potential, and we come together, we create a better Africa, a united Africa, a liberated Africa. But you see, and education, as I said at the beginning, it's a tool that you can use to do this. And I think the colonizers understand this.
Thank you.
And they want education to be really irrelevant to Africa. In fact, until recently, World Bank didn't support tertiary education in Africa because they thought, well, why do you need tertiary education in Africa? U.S. aid, I'm not sure right now, but it only supported at elementary level. You know? They don't support secondary school and tertiary levels. So you see, that's the issue. That's how they related. You know, if someone wants to stay in oppression, if someone wants to manipulate you, to remain in darkness, to be colonized, the education has to be like second class. You know, it's just useless. And most of all, the problem is there is no education, really transformative education, but there is this feeling that you feel educated. You know, there is a sense of education. You think you're educated. You have doctors and professors, and then that's false sense of education, and then it becomes a barrier between true education and human beings.
Wow.
So you can't promote a Pan-African objective, a Pan-African movement in an unqualified education, with quality, with education that has less quality.
What do we mean when we assert that our education system was another form of colonization?
You know, when we say Africa has been in existence, you know, actually we also claim, you know, human beings originated from Africa, exactly. Okay? And they have been existing is thousands of years. And when they were living here, apparently there was education. Right. You know, grandparents have been educating their parents, and parents were educating their children, so that, you know, wisdom, knowledge passes from one generation to the other. And they were living, you know, through interaction in marketplaces and other, you know, they were living together, you know, and they were interacting with themselves, with nature, with God, with their creator, whatever form they understood it. So apparently there was education. So when the colonizers came to Africa, they treated Africa as something ignorant, you know, as if there was nothing. It's a dark continent. There is a number of articles that actually they themselves wrote that they used now science or other subjects as a means to colonize them. Of course, with English itself. So you can't speak your language. You know, in Kenya, you know, there are a number of stories when you speak their own language, you're considered as stupid. Even in Ethiopia, some schools these days, you know, they're considered stupid, so you're not allowed to speak Amharic. So that was that colonial mentality, not only in terms of the language, the content itself. The content is simply, it's not transformative, because you don't learn your language. So when you say, your culture, which means you bring your daily life to school. You know, you bring injera, you bring buna, you bring, I don't know, whatever it is, ash. You bring it to the classroom, you learn about it, you either, you know, develop it, transform it, or, you know, you discard it. That's what the purpose of education is. It's like transmission and transformation. But this colonial education didn't do that. They just simply brought their own material. You know, the first textbook came from England, you know, the way we were educated, and then we were having a, London exam. We passed, we were basically prepared to serve in Europe and the US. Still now, you know, any well-educated person is better prepared to live in the Western country. And there is this University of Amsterdam, a professor studied recently how an exposure to formal education in Ethiopia makes you leave your country. You know? Wow. It's like proportional. The more you're educated, the more you want to live. You go. Wow. So it's a systematic, deliberate action done by certain countries and certain multilateral organizations. You know, every money comes, attached with a certain agenda. That you still have, less quality, relevant education. And they just simply say access, and you have hundreds of students in the school without proper teacher, without proper materials and all these. So that happens.
So it's safe to say we're still colonized.
Apparently. And very interestingly, what I say, even we haven't understood what we have been learning and teaching, the curriculum itself. So when you build a curriculum, 4 foundations that you should consider. The first one is philosophy. Philosophy is a philosophy of education. A philosophy of the country. Philosophy of education comes from the national philosophy. So now you can ask, do we have a national philosophy? Like everyone knows of, or everyone is proud of, or everyone studies. Until there was no even, a department of philosophy. So what happens? So that's where you build everything, because philosophy is a framework, a worldview. It is through that lens that you understand the world, that you interact with others, and that actually it's also a filter, to decline or to accept something. So there is no philosophical foundation in our curriculum. It's only like in the last 2 years we started to talk about educational philosophy. And even then we haven't answered the question, fundamental questions for philosophy, that what's a human being? Really, in Ethiopia, what do we believe about human beings? What's education? We haven't properly addressed them. But we were supposed to, you see, that's the problem. We even couldn't translate into action what we have been studying. So that's the first one. The second one is sociological foundation. Sociological is just simply culture, as I have discussed already that enough. You should study the culture, the language, the mentality of the people, so that you you make it as a foundation for learning. The third one is historical foundation. You should study your history. Where did we start? We had abundant schools, we had Quranic schools, we had different traditional schools, The Abba Gada system was a very complex, holistic system, in which people addressed holistically, the problems in their own community. And in Ethiopia, my friend Abdul Fattah has identified almost 136 Ethiopian traditional systems, justice and administrative systems. These are holistic, and I have asked some of my students, PhD students, to identify what this means to education, or how they understand what a human being is. So Ethiopia has this rich history, which we actually sort of discarded. And when they are asked to read about Afar or any about Somali, they would be surprised. Oh, do we have all these things in our midst, and we have disregarded them. The way the Afars talk to each other, or the way they treat their environment, almost in every corner of Ethiopia. The last one is psychology, a psychological foundation. So now in our school, we I think, as if we don't have any psychological knowledge or psychological history, we just import all the studies, the philosophies, the textbooks from outside, and we use those psychological lessons from the outside world. And the Ethiopian child psychology, I know for sure, much different than the Western child, in many ways. So it means, it's like there is no foundation to build on our schools, you see, because the children's philosophy, history, sociology, and psychology is not considered. So now we're building, like any building, without a strong foundation,
exactly.
it will fall. That's how we are educating our children. And that's why they are confused. We're confused.
We're all confused.
Ultimately, education is doing nothing.
Wow. As it has been confirmed that home and local context matter in the education of children, how do we ensure that global contexts also matter without causing confusion?
Well, it's a very simple, anyway, for a curricular expert, in a way, simple question. Because when you build curriculum, it tells you to build from simple to complex, from concrete to abstract, from the closest to the furthest. Well, when a child comes to school, he has to start from his own self, her own self, then from the family. It's like a concentric circle. It gets expanded. So first we study how to put, what we know actually, because now UN actually supports us starting school with mother tongue. The same thing with the culture that they find in the home. If they pray, the child has to learn how to pray. If the home is praying, if the home is fasting, what kind of food they are eating, do they know how to prepare it? Do they understand what they are eating? So they start from home. And then you have the community. So in the primary school, now you can the neighborhood, and then you have the community. And then maybe in high school, you start to study the society. And then when you're in tertiary level, university, now you start to deal with the outside world, because you are now built on a very solid foundation. it's easy for you to incorporate other knowledge system. And the global universal knowledge, in a sense, is also universal, you know. So now we get to study all the philosophies, I mean, psychology, whatever they have. We study it, we refine it, and we integrate it with whatever we have, you know. So now there is no confusion.
Exactly.
If there is a strong foundation, you will not be confused.
Confusion. Beautiful. Can you tell us something about the rock-hewn churches in the context of furthering the indigenous knowledge base?
Why did you wish? Well, yeah, that's my mission in life, basically. I have the rest of my days. My intention is, again, like to make this a reality, you know, to get into the bottom of our indigenous knowledge. Yes. And bring them to school, to really also help the generation understand we have, first of all, what we are doing is wrong, okay? Then where do we start? That's been a discourse that I've been trying to promote with my friends, with the media, with the Minister of Education and all, and wherever chance I get. So the rock-hewn churches, studying the rock-hewn churches is just one other endeavor. It was like a 3-year project that Addis Ababa University, in collaboration with the University of Toronto, because the University of Toronto is a professor who is interested in Ethiopia, has been studying Ethiopia for 25 years. So he comes and goes. So now I want to understand Ethiopian science. So if there is science at all, if there is knowledge, there has to exist in the community. So we sort of developed a project to go, you know, particularly the northern part of Ethiopia, starting here from the Burhan, like until the tip of Tigray, there are now contemporary rock-hewn churches. These are, you know, priests, you know, craftsmen who are not educated in the current sense. You know, they have never been to the formal school. Maybe they have been attending to second grade, third grade, so they have never been to school. But these ordinary people, but were actually educated in the Christian education system, they go to let's say, a certain mountain, they start to dig a church. So in order to dig a church, a rock-hewn church inside from a rock, it's like a lalibela. That's a lot of knowledge, you know. You need to understand the type of soil, the type of rock, and then also you should work within the darkness, and the way you curve is from top to bottom. You know, when you build a house, it's the opposite.
It's the other way.
You start, So they have to measure, you know, they have to do this arch, you know, pillars, you know, stage, so many things. And they don't use any instrument except their hand. And a bit sort of chisel-like instruments. And they have the speed, of course, to take out the soil. And they spend 3 years, 4 years, 5 years building such a very nice church in nowhere, you know, like... and it becomes an amazing, of course, for the community to meet, to pray, and also for tourists, actually, if you want to visit. And the point is that, like, you don't bring anything from outside. That is the wisdom in the construction. You don't bring anything, like, you don't bring cement, you don't bring anything from the outside. You don't have to buy anything. It's only you,
Your hand
you carve out, you carve out a house, let's say. You carve out a hole in just the middle of a rock. And it lasts longer than the house. And also in terms of temperature, it's also like the temperature is always kept almost constant. So many advantages to it. And you don't have to also restore it every time, you know. It stays for a long time. And we can now draw this knowledge and take it to our normal life, you know. That's what I was trying to discuss. What was the physics, what's the chemistry? Not only that, also, if you want to provide a holistic education to our children, so what are the inspiration in this process, you know? So these people, for example, wake up early in the morning, you know, there's always a prayer program. They have to pray, and then they have to dig 16 hours, you know, starting early in the morning until 10 p.m., and then they have to take out the soil that they dug out, and they don't eat much, you know. They only minimum of like injera, shiro, some kolo, and they survive and healthy. It defies what we think of science, you know. Like we have to eat balanced food. You have to always stay in the light. You don't have to stay in the dark, and this has a different dimension. That's what we call spirituality, you know. It's like it defies some intellect, or like even for the body, is to dig 16 hours a day and then again tomorrow with a new energy to go back to the cave and continue to dig for 5 years. I mean, the body must be a different one.
I know, right?
That's why they say, oh, okay, it's the angels help us. You know, when they ask them, there is an element that they cannot really explain. That there is a super power, maybe assisting them. I mean, that's for me, that's that spiritual dimension. They have developed that spiritual dimension. If, then you can imagine, if we now take those important lessons from these people and bring it to our architecture school, you know, can our schools, can our students in architecture school, can they really work in the dark for 1 day, 2 days?
I know, not 5 years. Yeah. You know, that's very interesting you said that, because I was talking to an architect actually, and he's a teacher at the university, and it was a moment where somebody said something in English and somebody said it in Amharic. And interestingly, they understood what he meant in Amharic, obviously, than they did in English. So when you actually teach these students who are, Amharic speakers, and then all of a sudden when they get into university, they have to even think in English, not only talk or read, but the understanding of the English language versus the Amharic language. So when you're explaining something in English, and then the teacher found out or saw that they didn't quite get it, but when he said the word in Amharic, they understood everything that the teacher said. So doesn't that hold students back? The language barrier is really my question.
Yeah, well, this is our daily experience in our university. Now these days, the master's students, when they get you their proposal, it's very difficult to read, to understand.
Yeah.
So we don't even teach it well. That's my problem. English is okay language. It's expressive. You have to learn it well so that you can express yourself.
Exactly.
You can communicate. But in the absence of that, now asking them to do research in English or having the discussion in English is honestly is really laughable. I tell you how degraded it is within the classroom. That and then with my graduate students, I usually say, okay, you study English in your own. You want to communicate, you want to speak English, that's good. I can also speak English, but now we're staying in Amharic. Because you are working in Ethiopia, you're serving the Ethiopian government. It's the working language is Amharic, so now we should understand the content. Really, what we know, we know it in Amharic. So, of course, I know these PhD students may graduate and then they have to deal with the outside world, and that's a different story. But for me, I want them to understand what curriculum is, what actually education is. So I have to discuss it in Amharic. That's the pattern I always follow. I know it's a graduate class, it's a medium of instruction is English, but unless I start it, who else I'm waiting for? So my discussion in the classroom is in Amharic. I invite guests and I encourage them to speak Amharic, so that the students get the essence, the concept of what. Otherwise, we have been learning in English and we haven't.
We haven't gotten far, right? Can you explain what you mean by a smooth transition between home and classroom prepares children for enjoyable and meaningful lifelong learning?
You have a child, and when you bring the child to school, the child shouldn't cry, in a sense.
First of all.
First of all.
Yes.
Because learning has to be an enjoyable experience.
Yeah.
It means if he was playing at home, he should be also playing in the school. Maybe a different play. Yeah. Okay? If he was staying with parents should come. Moms particularly, are responsible for educating their children because they are the first responsible to educate the child. So they should come to school. Otherwise, the child has no reason to avoid the school. But the experience that we provide them in this day is really, it's unbelievable. Like a 3-year, a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old kid is forced to ride, to drill, to spend hours and hours, and while the children, like until age 6, should be engaged in play. In games, they have to play, and of course, the home has to come here. That's what I say. The feeling, the language, everything else. And then now it becomes smooth. Now they start to a school. And the only thing that you can succeed in doing is by creating curiosity. And I'm like, you create interest in learning. Because now they like school, they come to school, they like to interact with the teachers. Now you're preparing them for further learning. Then when they're in grade primary and secondary grade, now you can bring the academic side. But not true. Now there is a competition of teaching English, it's a totally foreign language. The parents don't talk it at home. See? So you force them to learn, apple is meaningless, you teach them English, and not only English, the methods we're conducting is totally strange. So children don't enjoy the experience in a school. And because of also the reasons that I mentioned earlier, there is the philosophy, like if children are praying at home, you're not praying here, Yeah. If you hear a story at home, you don't hear a story here.
I heard that, and I heard that through my daughter, actually, that students were stopped from praying. And I was actually upset. Why would they do that? And she said, well, they've already said that they're not supposed to pray. And I'm like, why? Why? They used to do it before. And I remember because she used to tell me we were, while they were praying, all their friends were covering them so other students wouldn't come disturb them. It wasn't about the teachers, it was the other students. This year, they were actually asked not to do it. And I don't think that's fair, especially if you are a religious person.
That is what you see in relation to Pan-Africanism itself, The concept of secularism is a foreign Western concept. And they understand it and practice it in a different way than we do it here, you see? So in the name of secularism, we have avoided all these practices, rather than finding a way so that everybody prays according to their interest, according to their space, because that was what they are doing at home and then their weekends, In fact, we should encourage them to really stay calm, to pray, to connect themselves with her being. And that should be our education. That is an African education. It's a spiritual education. And that's how we are going to excel the West. Otherwise, if we follow still the Western philosophy or the Western model, we are going to follow them. We're going to be always, customers. They're customers.
Exactly, and we still are, and we don't want to. And I don't think it's just us. I have a feeling we actually were never colonized. Now imagine what the colonized African countries are going through in their education system, because they're probably teaching in either French or English, even from a primary. At least we start with our language in some cases. But they don't even use their language at all. So it must
but
be
now
harder.
we're colonized in a sense. Physically, we're not colonized. But through education, now we have been colonized. We cannot speak of, we should rather talk about how to decolonize out of this. Of course, we expelled the Italians and of course the British, but unfortunately, through their education system, we are more, I think, in fact, in some ways, we're more colonized than the other African countries.
Unfortunately. As strong as the indigenous knowledge base is in Ethiopia, why do you think it didn't enter the world of science and spirituality?